me begin by thanking you, the club, for all the support you give the Magnolia School District. An example is the project with the dictionaries. This is something that students will have for years to come. And remember that their community thought enough of them to give them a book, and they'll think of the community as supporting them in their educational endeavors, and that means a whole lot to third graders. Just because I've been here for a long time certainly does not mean that I am an expert on the history of Magnolia schools. Mike Epley is an expert if you want to talk to an expert. But I can tell you some things about Columbia County and the schools and some things that happened through the years that maybe just because I've had some records of them I happen to know about. First of all, I'm going to give you some names and y'all think of what you might know about them. Calhoun, Atlanta, Mount Calm, Brister, Freehope, Beech Creek, Cypress Fork, Lone Beach, Welcome, Spotsville, Milner, Macedonia. Are these familiar names to you? It's Columbia County, isn't it? And there's many more of those names out there. But these are just some of the places that actually had a school at one time. Many of them were 1- and 2-room schoolhouses. Many of y'all actually went to some of those schools. We know there were at least 77 schools in Columbia County. And just think about that for a minute. 77 schools, and many of those were districts at one time. We know that because Hobson was number 77. There maybe were a few more, because some people tend to think there's around 80, but we know 77. The earliest information that I can find comes from Goodspeed's biographical information of Southwest Arkansas, and that's just a little source of old-timey information that is fun for me to read. But in it, it talks about Columbia County in 1890 and talks about the history before that. And I'm going to quote because I love the wording of it. The first school now remembered in Columbia County was a subscription white school in Calhoun that was built in 1851 and 50 and 51. And guess why they built that school? It was to keep the boys out of mischief. Some things don't change. The people then in the northern part of the county also put together a school of value before the Civil War, and it was called the Columbia Institute. Then in the early 1870s, the Magnolia Female Institute flourished instead of public schools. Even the Waldo, McNeil, Buckner schools were all private schools at that time. Public schools had not quite come in too much into being, or as we know them today anyway. Most of the schools just had one teacher. Now Magnolia had 6 teachers at that time. Waldo had 2 and Milner had 2, and they did not record the other schools in that document. Now the Magnolia School District was organized in 1860 to provide a public education for the Magnolia area. At that time, it was 38 square miles. Today, we have 387 square miles. So we've grown just a little bit, but that gives you a feel. It was really just the downtown area that was part of the history. The building that they first housed the school was a white frame structure with green window shades. I'm sure they were beautiful. And they sat near where the central school is now, and I'm not quite sure where that structure sat. Now, one of the big events, and some of you I know already know it, and I was shocked that Todd even knew about it, was the Southwestern Academy. And I put some little booklets out, one on each table, so I thought some of you might enjoy looking through them to see who some of the teachers were, what their qualifications were, and the language is absolutely marvelous, the way they wrote up about the school. But to quote the handbook, the people of Magnolia decided at their annual school meeting in 1892 that a new schoolhouse must be built and a high school provided for a large scholastic population of the district. Nobody at the beginning foresaw the character of the school that grew out of this resolution. But the discussions and the plans, the needs and the wisdom of the people brought out of chaos. I don't know how much chaos they had, but it's interesting that they had chaos. A magnificent brick building, well equipped and ready for occupancy in December 1894. J.W. Cantwell, who came from Yale University, was elected the principal. And some of the teachers had very interesting credentials. 1903, the Southwest Academy had some of the grades that were supported by some public funds. I'm assuming these were the lower grades. Or before that, it was all tuition-based. The enrollment in the Southwest Academy started with 116 students, and it grew to 365 in 1903. They had students from Texas and Louisiana and South Arkansas, so it was considered a school with some stature that people tried to get their students to. There was a dormitory built, but they only had one for the girls and the lady teachers, and the arrangements were made for the young men and boys at the home for the assistant principal. So they stayed with the assistant principal. Now I'm quoting again, the idea of a dormitory for boys was abandoned after due consideration because the town was so quiet. It was unnecessary to collect students and assume strict supervision at night. There were no night revels, parties, I guess, and hence no collecting of boys after dark. In such a place, it is better not to collect the boys. In 1910, Magnolia was successful in getting a third district agricultural school. The first classes began in 1911. The third district agricultural school was originally a secondary school. Do you see where this is going? Many of you already know. Its mission was to bring the country boy and girl the training that has for its purpose the upbuilding of rural life. In 1925, there were 2 years of college that were added to that school, and the name was changed to Agricultural and Mechanical College. I believe you know the rest of that story, don't you, as they did. The high school then was dropped in 1937, and it, of course, became a 4-year college and beyond. In 1917, this was another big event year. This was the year that they decided to build a secondary school, and they were to build it west of where the Southwestern Academy was located. It was for the first 6th grades, and a lot of y'all went to that school, I bet, the old Magnolia High School. There was an agriculture shop, a gym, and home economics cottage that were all built with WPA projects at that time. And of course, that was located, as most of you know, where Bank Force South is now. The Southwest Academy building at some point, and some of you probably know this, became the Magnolia Grammar School. I don't know how that all fell into place, but that building was destroyed in 1939. And I put this out on some of the tables, and y'all can pass around and look at those who are interested. This was from 1940, a newspaper article. One about the new school. There's two important articles actually on this page, and they were all, I think, in the same edition of the newspaper. One was about the new grammar school building and how it was built and the pride of that community. And the other was about the consolidation of 5 schools that became the Walker School District. And so there were two big pieces of history in 1940 for Columbia County. Let me find myself. Eventually, that building burned in 1939, and that's when in 1940, the old Central School was built. The interesting thing about the article is it was built by the youth as a training project, as part of the National Youth Administration. And the board and the community were very proud. They saved a lot of money because they used youth labor and with supervision to build that project and gave training to the youth of the community. And it was so successful that the very next year, as they were finishing that project, they had the architect to build, to draw a 2-story brick building that others will know, you will know as the old Columbia High School. And that building was built along with the gymnasium and an auditorium, and was opened the next year. And did it also as a NYA project. The high school section of Columbia burned in 1984, but it was immediately, a similar building was constructed, and it was constructed on the same site. Now, on that site before then, there had been a school there since 1916. So there has been a school on the old Columbia sites, we know, since 1916. Another interesting period of construction was the Rosenwald period. Now, we've had several speakers talk about the Rosenwald schools, but you just kind of have to bring that up when you bring up schools in Columbia County. There were 8 that were built in Columbia County. There is only one left, but that's an amazing feat that there is still one left, because that's very rare. And that's the Freehope School. And it was converted into a community center some years ago, still serves that community. And that is something to be proud of, that has been preserved and is still there. Those schools, as many of you probably know, were built by a Jewish man from Chicago named Julius Rosenwald. And he was the president of Sears and Roebuck Corporation. And he built many, I'm thinking in the thousands of schools from Maryland to Texas for African American students back in anywhere from 1917 to the early 30s. So they were he made a big impact by building those schools. Then, how do we get from 77 school districts to where we are today? Well, there have been consolidations, but they kind of have been in clusters in the early 30s, and then again in the mid-40s, and then there have been some scatterings of consolidations throughout the years. But just get this in mind. In 1929 and 30, in the state of Arkansas, there were 1,500 school consolidations. 1,500 school consolidations. So that tells you how many little schools there were around. Then there were more the next year, and most of the ones that affected Columbia County actually were in the 1930-31 school year. Many times, if you had a small community like in Calhoun, there would be a 1-room white school and a 1-room black school. Well, at some point, they consolidated then and became like the Calhoun School. And these consolidations continued on as schools merged over, many schools merged several different times. They made several different stops before they get to where they are now. Many of these one-room schools were first through sixth grade. Some were first through eighth grade. And then most of the time they came into, on a tuition base, into some high schools. But now there were 7 or 8 of our small schools around that did have a high school, even back in those days. Now some of you in here, and I know 3 of you, that attended one-room schoolhouses. How many of y'all actually went to a one-room or 2-room schoolhouse? Some of you in Columbia County, some in Dallas County. We got them from different places. And I know TG has told me he did that in Iowa. So, you know, we have some very successful people who came from those one-room schoolhouses, is the point I wanted to make. In 1931, Magnolia School District had 27 teachers. And remember that this was just the downtown area. In 1946 through 48, there was a significant number of consolidations. Many communities consolidated at that point. Also in 47, 48, there were some significant structural things that happened here. One, we lost Columbia High School was burned. There was a primary school that was burned in Waldo, and the village gymnasium, which was something that people talked about for years, was blown away by a tornado. And all the students escaped, but the coach was killed in that event. So some of y'all remember that, I bet. I just know some stuff from past history. In 1950, though, with all the consolidations that happened in the 40s, we wound up with 7 school districts. That was Magnolia, Village, Walker, McNeil, Waldo, Emerson, and Taylor. So it all happened pretty quickly there in the 40s. Then in the 80s, there was a second round statewide. It didn't affect us very much, but Village merged with Magnolia at that point. And then other consolidations were in 2004. Of course, Walker came to Magnolia. Emerson Taylor merged, and McNeil consolidated with Stevens. In 2006, then Waldo consolidated with Magnolia, and then last year Emerson Taylor, of course, merged with Bradley. And then now for next year, as we understand it, the Stevens part of the McNeil part of the Stevens School District will be coming to Magnolia, which leaves the county with 2 school districts, basically. So we've gone from 77 and we're down to 2 now. But that's the story at this point on consolidations and some of the history. Of course, there's many more pieces of history that go on, and many of you have far more interesting stories than I have, but I think it helps to know kind of where we came from and how we got to the point we are in now. Thank you.